if folks could get settled. We're getting ready to begin. I just wanted to say a few words. The morning we have our first session from now until 10:30. Then we'll have a break, and then at 11 we have a panel that will be of students talking about their work on campus. At noon, we will break. We'll break for lunch, and we'll break until 12:30. Then we'll do what we did yesterday. We will have a noon talk, and Steve McDonald is going to be talking about the three greatest misconceptions about HIPAA and FERPA, and that is for those of you who are interested, but I think that is a topic that many of us are interested in and will want to know more about. A couple of other things. For all the SAC scholars, could the SAC scholars just raise their hands so people know who you are? There's Michelle and Sam. Yesterday, there was a question that was asked about licensure and medical licensure and what questions get asked. I wanted to say, Sam, could you please raise your hand so everyone knows who you are? Sam is actually writing, his research as part of the SAC scholarship is on the licensure issues and what questions are appropriate to be asked and how we think about that. So for any of you who are interested in that issue, please see Sam so he can share his work with you. Also for the SAC scholars, we would like to meet you outside at the break to have your photograph taken. Thank you. We are going to do this morning, just like we did yesterday afternoon. All of you have cards on or near your chairs. So Michelle and Sam have the baskets, so they will be collecting cards with your questions and comments during the session. They will then bring them to me to ask our panel. So please do use your cards. Also, not only for questions and comments, but for any of you who have feedback or ideas for future programs, please feel free, and we would encourage you also to write down your ideas and give them to us on the cards. We are very interested in those. Now, our first panel of this morning, Session 4, Veterans with Mental Illness on Campus and in the Classroom, supporting our students who have supported our country. When we began to think about what topics that we wanted for this conference, we had many, many more topics than we could possibly cover in the time that we had. It was clear to all of us that one of the topics we absolutely wanted to include was veterans on campus. And we are extremely pleased to have put together a terrific group of people who have been thinking and are thinking about the issues that affect veterans who are students on campus a great deal and are doing research on that. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Penny Pierce, who is the moderator of this morning's panel.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Thank you for coming and listening to our panel that we hopefully will inform you about a unique student veteran population. But before I start the official business, I want to take a personal moment to say I had 34 years of military service, and I think the talks by the 4 students yesterday were among the most brave and heroic acts I've ever witnessed. And I would ask you to join me in applauding them. I'm forever changed by your testimony yesterday. Thank you for that. For those of you on college campuses, you know you've had an influx of students recently following Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. It's probably the largest since World War II, when the GI Bill came into effect that provided an opportunity for predominantly men, but women also, to change their life by getting an education. One of those was my father, who was wounded in the Philippines at Bataan, was left for dead until the Japanese came and rounded the survivors up, and he spent the rest of the war in a prisoner of war camp. When he was released and brought back to the country on a ship, which allowed them time to travel and fatten up, he went to college at University of Florida. He never talked about it. The veterans today are very different. They're coming back and they're talking and they're sharing. And our panel today will share their stories to better inform you about the unique needs of today's veterans on college campuses. With that, we'll start introductions at the end with Adam. They, in turn, will introduce themselves, tell you where they are coming from, their organization or institution. And I've asked them to give one bullet about what they want to make sure they communicate to you this morning. So Adam.
Good morning, thank you. My name is Adam Renteria. I'm a current Master in Social Work student at the USC School of Social Work. I'm also doing an internship at the USC Center for Innovation and Research on veterans and military families. Served 5 years in the United States Army, deployed to Iraq, came home and came up through the community college through system to the Cal State system, and now here at USC. I also want to introduce, some of you have seen my my service dog. His name is Rakasan. He's fully certified for PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And you'll see.
There we go.
There you go. Yeah, you'll see him, poke out a little bit, but he's been a different modality in treatment. And when I got him, I had been in various treatments for 2 years. It took me 8 years to start seeking services and treatments. But then it just got to a point where I needed to take my healing process to another level. And there was a few things I was willing to try and a few things I was not willing to try and do. And so I settled on the service dog, and it has been above and beyond my expectations. So, meet Rakasan.
And his name, Adam, you were going to tell us.
Oh, his name, Rakasan. Well, Rakasan was the unit that I was attached to when I deployed to Iraq. Rather than come up with a few different names to honor some of the battle buddies that did not come home with us, I just decided to name them after the unit, the 187th Infantry. And they got the name from World War II. When they jumped into the Pacific, the Japanese actually did not have a name for paratroopers. So they saw these paratroopers jumping out of the sky, and they called them Rakasans, which means falling umbrellas in Japanese. So they kept the name Rakasans. So that's where he got his name from. And he's a Korean Jindo, so go figure. And all of his commands are in Spanish, so he's kind of a global dog.
Thanks, I'm Todd.
Great. Good morning. So my name is Todd Adamson. I'm a clinical psychologist with an organization called US Vets, or it's the US Veterans Initiative. And US Vets is the nation's largest nonprofit offering comprehensive case management to homeless veterans and their families. And we have 11 sites across the country, and we're based here in Los Angeles. And in 2011, we rolled out a program called Outside the Wire. And Outside the Wire was directed and geared towards providing free, confidential mental health counseling to student veterans on campuses. And we're based here in the greater Los Angeles area, and we currently work with about 8 community colleges from Pasadena to Santa Monica down into Orange County. And we're providing individual group counseling, and it's not only to the veteran on campus, but their significant other, their spouse, family member, could be a parent, could be a sibling, could be, it's the full family system. And the idea was to offer these services early on, as soon as the student veteran is landing on the campus, and to try and avoid some of these problems with that develop maybe longer term problems of family and substance abuse issues and the further pathology of PTSD. And we work based out of veteran resource centers on campus, and veteran resource centers are where student veterans can come together on campus to gather, hang out, study, and get their ed plans developed and worked on. And in addition to that, we also have been working closely with USC and the Center for Innovative Research to collect data in terms of demographic data. We're doing a program evaluation to make sure that what we're doing is effective and how we can do things better. And Adam's been part of collecting some of the data in that regard. And so essentially, the program is an early intervention and prevention model to get these services to student veterans and fill in holes if they exist on campus, work with the established counseling and psych services and infrastructure on campus to give these veterans a smooth transition back home. That's it.
Thanks, Todd. Kim.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kim Finney, and I am also a clinical psychologist. I retired about 17 months ago from the Air Force. I spent 23 years serving in the Air Force as a psychologist and have treated thousands of service members, not just Air Force airmen, but sailors, soldiers, and Marines and their family members and alike. I am now, I hold a clinical associate professor position at the School of Social Work here at USC. And one of my passions is educating clinicians who desire to work with service members and veterans and their families, as well as educating faculty, staff, and other clinicians on military culture.
All right. Well, I can't tell you how excited I am to be here today and with such a distinguished panel. We've already been having some great conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to share that here today. If I can just for a moment paint a picture of what the last 10 plus years have looked like for the military and higher education. Around 2001, 2003, our country went to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, respectively. A couple of years later, as members, they did their 4 years, they got out, started to go to school. A wave of veterans hit campuses. A lot of those campuses weren't ready for these veterans. They weren't necessarily aware of some of the challenges and difficulties that were unique to this population. As any subculture on any campus has unique needs and unique potential. So a couple of these individuals started to form groups on their campuses. Hey, you're a veteran, I'm a veteran. Let's talk about what we're experiencing. Let's talk about what we can do to better our lives here on campus, to potentially inform the audience of our campus of what we face, some of the challenges that we're having, some of the successes that we're seeing. And around 2008, some of these campuses across the United States started to realize, hey, you're doing this over in LA. You're doing this over in DC. In 2008, they met in Chicago, a founding 20 organization of chapters, and formed Student Veterans of America. That's the organization I represent as their Vice President of External Affairs, which generally breaks down to Director of Communications, Press Secretary, Legislative Director, and Director of Government Affairs. So it's quite a treat, as you can imagine. This entire approach that SVA has taken, this peer-to-peer mentality, has really carried the organization through where we are today. A lot of the success that veterans see and experience on campus is not necessarily due to some sort of policy change or administrative change, but through their peers. And that model is something that we do espouse today. A big part of where our organization is going is towards a data-driven approach. There was a lot of speculation, a lot of anecdote about the experiences of veterans, but there was no basis of understanding of where veterans were, how they were succeeding, what the graduation rates looked like, what fields they were going into. And as a result, Student Veterans of America, over the last 4 years, has been developing a comprehensive research project called the Million Records Project. This project, for the first time in over 70 years, will afford an answer to the question, how are veterans doing on campus? At the end of the month, we will be releasing those findings, so stay tuned. It should be very exciting, and we're very interested to see how that turns out. I already know the results. Not going to spoil it, but it will be very interesting. My background, I enlisted in the Marine Corps when I was 17. I started with the 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines in Chicago, and moved over to 4th Marine Logistics Group in DC. I've done logistics, and am in the process of moving over to counterintelligence, human intelligence, presently in the reserves. I look forward to the conversation we're going to have here, and hopefully we are able to share some nuggets of interest to you. I think my personal approach, I'd like to leave you all with some challenges that are on campus for veterans, but also some potential solutions that you can employ.
Great, thanks. I've been asked to mention a little bit about Uniformed Services University, which is where I come from. It's a DoD school. It's located on the campus of Walter Reed across from NIH on Wisconsin Avenue in DC, actually in Bethesda. It has a medical school, graduate school of nursing, and medical, clinical psychology. The important takeaway message there is that there is no tuition. Students do not pay. The active duty students have payback agreements, but we have civilian psychology students and civilian students in other areas. So pass the word. That's really important. No tuition. Yesterday's panel on culture raised some issues, I'm sure, for all of us. So I thought it might be interesting if we took a moment to share what the military culture is for people who don't know that intimately. Each service has a set of core values that we operate under, and those are ingrained in us. It becomes part of our protoplasm and directs our behavior until the day we die. Air Force core values are integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. And that's the end of the conversation. So the students that you get are going to be unique in some ways and also lead to some of the frustrations that they experience with people who might be late, not do assignments, bore them with trivial things. So in turn, as people are comfortable, talk about that interface of the military culture on an academic campus.
Sure. Especially when you go into the military at such a young age, when you're 17, 18 years old, right out of high school, you're still in the prime stages of your character building, your entire development. And so when you go from high school, whether it be public or private, but then go into a boot camp and go through this process, and then live in this culture for 4 years, 3, 4, 5 years, that is your development. That is your identity. That's who you become. And then coming home during the transition, you come out to another culture, but you don't ever shed that part of you, that identity, that military culture, so to speak. It's easy to shed the civilian side when you go in, but it's impossible to shed that military side when you come out. So you come out here to the civilian side, to the academics, and then you start to wonder, where you fit in, where do you belong. how do you relate to other people, because in academics or at the student level, you're students while you're in school. You're not students really on the weekend. You can kind of shed that identity. When you're in the military, you are a service member 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no matter whether you're in uniform, you're out of uniform, you're on leave, you're in the field. You are a service member. And it's not really necessarily the case, from the civilian side. No matter what it is you do, you're not fully embraced in your identity, whether it be a student or a professional. So I think that's part of the struggle when you transition from that military culture into another culture.
What was the transition like, Adam? Can you talk more specifically about the kinds of things you found troublesome?
My transition, it was my transition for me when I came home in 2004. I left the battlefield in December, and I was on a college campus in February. And so there was just a strong sense of not belonging where I was. It was I could describe it as being a fish out of water. Really not understanding what the reality was around me. Not understanding how to wear civilian clothes, not understanding how to interact with people, especially students who were a little bit younger than me, but what I like to call is didn't have the miles that I had. Some of us were same age, but I felt like I had many more miles of experience that they didn't have. So it was just hard establishing relationships, and I think that was a key component. Disconnecting from reality and not connecting to people and forming and building relationships. And so that's how it's so easy to isolate. That's how it's so easy to, go to class and just kind of do your own thing. And even with other veterans, in 2004, 2005, there wasn't that many veterans that were my age that had come home. A lot of service members were still serving at the time, and in 2004, being some of the first ones to come back, it was just hard finding vets and then finding people to relate to. So I think that was the toughest thing for my transition, was finding people I could build relationships with.
Will, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I would say, so two things. First, veterans face unique issues, but on top of that, they face things just like anyone else. The transition to college is scary for anyone. You have a new experience. You're not sure where you're at. You're trying to find, what your identity in the campus culture is. Relationships are a challenge. Family issues are a challenge. So in addition to the experiences you might have as a veteran, you're also facing all the other struggles that any other student's going through. And I think that's an important piece, because it's important to understand that it's not just veterans' issues that are the piece of the pie. That's not the full pie. There's other pieces to that pie which can have a direct impact on those veteran slices. It's a unique subculture. Many veterans are able to relate to each other better, and having a chapter of Student Veterans of America or just a chapter of veterans that you can relate to is very helpful. But not every veteran wants to come back and then relate to other veterans. Sometimes they want to shed that identity as much as possible. So those individuals then have sometimes a tough time integrating with their peers who might be 18 years old, just brand new to college. They have a tough time relating to them, but then they also have a tough time relating to their fellow veterans. Not all veterans have the same experience. Not every veteran is an infantryman who's walked down the streets and on patrols and kicked down a door. The experiences of the veteran culture are as nuanced as any other subculture. And so that's a really important piece to understand. In addition to all that, just the bureaucracy of working with the Department of Veterans Affairs or government services, that's an added piece, an added stressor to life that many don't have. Just even trying to get through a call center to get a question answered, a very basic question. There was one time I shared this last night. There was one time I called into Department of Veterans Affairs about some GI Bill questions. I got through about 12 prompts, which were very frustrating. It took me about 15 minutes to even get through all of those. And then the whole time you're wondering, oh, did I press 1 or 2? Should I press 3? You know, can we go back? Is there no go back? It's like this whole convoluted scenario. And then by the end, basically had run through the entire call center tiers and got to a point where it said, you know, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the recording said, at this time we cannot, you know, support you, and hung up. The call center hung up on me. It was a recorded hang up on me. And you know, as an individual, I would say compared to some of my peers, you know, my experiences were probably relatively tame. I can imagine someone who has, you know, other struggles that they're dealing with to have that experience. I can't imagine how that would be something you could handle rationally. It would be so difficult to recenter yourself and understand how to approach that. You know, for me, I didn't have a lot of issues going on, and I still wanted to put my hand through a window or something. I mean, I didn't, but that was the level of aggression it brought in me to be hung up on by the department that was supposed to be supporting me. You know, and so it's not surprising when individuals, you know, have these frustrations. That whole piece is something that most students never even have to deal with, never even know of. And so for that reason, it can be very difficult. And you've got the stress of being a student, the stress of transitioning, and then the added stress of the bureaucracy that you have to deal with to get your benefits. The three pieces of that, then potentially having a family, potentially working through, you know, any disability you might have. I mean, how does one deal with that? So it can be very difficult. For me, and some of my fellow classmates who were also veterans, we formed what was called a vet house. It was basically, it was a pseudo-fraternity house, pseudo-military barracks close to the campus, and had individuals from a variety of different services, you know, different ages. Some had seen combat, some had not. But to be able to be in a house together with other veterans, you know, not necessarily always buddies at all times. You know, there's certainly heated debates and, well, no, the Marine Corps is better. No, the Army's better.
The Air Force is better.
Or the Air Force is better. You know, so that those come up. But at the end of the day, you know, we had each other's back, and that was the important thing for us. That, again, bringing back to that peer-to-peer support was hugely helpful. Adam was actually in that first cohort of individuals as we founded SVA over in the LA side. So does that seem pretty fair, that all?
That's absolutely fair, because, you know, when you're walking down a community college or any college campus for the first time, and you're walking through, I mean, everybody knows that when that second week of you know, the fall or spring semester is welcome week, and everybody's got a place where they belong, or a place where they fit, whether it be fraternity, whether it be, you know, this club or that club, this interest or that interest, and you know, you're walking through all of this, and you're asking yourself, well, where do I belong? Where do I fit? You know, you try to go into your interests. So, you know, if there's a club that interests me, I would go to that club, but there was still a disconnection there. There was still like, well, you know, I'm interested in the same things, but I don't really relate to who you are. And you can't relate to me, and we really don't have much to talk about beyond that. So back in 2008, you know, fortunately we were able to connect nationwide with different student veterans and understand that, hey, you know, what's going on in Michigan is going on in Long Beach. What's going on in Long Beach is the same thing in Wisconsin, Arizona, DC. And we were able to understand, like, wow, we're all going through a lot of the same similar experiences. Not just transitioning through as student veterans, but also, you know, dealing with the academic bureaucracy, dealing with the VA bureaucracy, dealing with, you know, being in a classroom as opposed to working as a service member. So that absolutely hits it on on point, for sure.
And I just wanted to follow up, as Adam and Will are kind of painting a picture, it's a complex process that's happening, just the transition, being on campus, trying to make sense of things, dealing with the VA, and if you've met one veteran, you've met one veteran. And I think that's important. There's a wide variety, experience, continuum of veterans with different experiences and what they bring to campus. And I think a lot of times, there's this image of the vet, who has PTSD. And we know that most people who go in the military and who experience combat are not going to come back and meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, people are going to be changed. It's understandable. And on campuses, I think there's a disconnect. Well, and you're both talking about the disconnect between yourselves and the rest of the student body, and it is there. And in my experience working with vets on campus, just having a sense of being invisible on campus because of that disconnect, and kind of other students not really understanding, what it's really like to be a veteran and that veteran experience. I will say I think it's changing because of more of what both Will and Adam have talked about in terms of veterans getting together on campus and developing a voice and a way to be heard, connecting through vet clubs on campus, advocating for themselves, so that they can join with the community and develop that sense of, just educating everybody else. This is who I am. Mm-hmm. This is what it's like to be a veteran. This is what it's like for me to be on campus.
And I'd like to expand that lens a little bit and focus it to the classroom setting in terms of faculty having veteran students in their classroom and the need to kind of understand the culture of a veteran. When I'm talking to clinicians and trying to prepare and educate them on the culture and help-seeking behaviors of veterans and military alike, I always say that warriors don't come to the clinic for help, and that warrior mentality, if you will, holds true in the classroom. Most veteran students are very well trained, very competent. The government spends a lot of money in making it so. And however, the help-seeking behaviors are somewhat of the same, and it can be compounded based on your family of origin help-seeking behaviors. So a student may sit in front of you twice a week or however often you hold the class, and they're struggling and not really knowing where to turn to. So if colleges and campuses don't have a place where veterans can join, like a Veterans Transition Center, which I'm sure Todd will talk about some as we go on, where they can go and have this peer support. And I would even add, have some kind of formalized mentorship program where students that have been there at least a year form a bridge with new students and helping them navigate facilities and services on campus. Sorry. Base campus.
We used to call it base.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
As well as, again, educating faculty and staff regarding veterans, their culture, and trying to make that bridge a little shorter, which sets them up for greater success.
I think that speaks to a great point, actually. So with the tools to succeed, veterans are boundless. The potential is really, there's no limit. I have seen individuals come back from combat with severe PTS, have a very difficult time reintegrating, and in just a couple of years graduate and go on to found multi-million-dollar companies. That was just last year. When we look at the next 5 years, as 1 million+ veterans are going to be separating from the service, imagine what that 1 million+ veteran cohort can do. It truly is limitless. And that's something that I, really stress, because there are a lot of challenges and a lot of difficulties that veterans face, but that doesn't mean that they're broken. That doesn't mean that they're ruined for life. A veteran can work through a challenge with resilience and go on to achieve far beyond what anyone would ever expect. So that's something that I think is really important to remember, particularly as we look at the GI Bill. Spending $40 billion so far on the Montgomery GI Bill and post 9/11 GI Bill. The question is, what are we getting as taxpayers for that investment? And the answer is, you're getting a top-tier quality level of leadership being pumped into the economy that has just not been seen in decades. That's something that people are going to eventually see very clearly. I think we already see it. But the American economy has such potential to expand and build on this level of leadership and skill and experience that many veterans bring. The potential is truly limitless.
From a societal perspective, I think Will and I were having this conversation yesterday, and this is the conversation that we started back in 2008, kind of amongst the veteran community. Is one of the things that we kept hearing, coming onto a college campus, especially from our student peers, was, my grandpa's a veteran. You don't look like a veteran, but my grandpa is, or you don't look like a veteran. The guy on the freeway has a sign that says homeless vet. And one of the things that Will and I were talking about, and Dr. Finney, is changing kind of the discussion and the dialogue and the I guess, quote unquote, the stereotype of what a veteran is, or what does a veteran look like, or what are these vets going to do when they come back? And it's changing that perspective. And one of the first things that we did when we started the Veterans Network at Long Beach State was, guess what we're going to do? We're getting donations from different organizations, Smart Final, Costco, whatever the case may be. We're getting all these donations. So we're going to just stand outside on a hot day and hand out ice cold water. And we're going to serve the campus community. And we're going to show the campus community that we are veterans. We did, serve our country, and now we're here to be of service to our community still. And I think that's what what we're really trying to do is change that. Like, a service member just doesn't mean troop or soldier or Marine, whatever. The key component is that of service, and I think that's what we're trying to convey here, is that it's just a notion of service, and hopefully we can multiply that not just within the veteran community, but through society as a whole. Just that notion to be of service, and we're still continuing that today through the SVA and all these different organizations. Team Rubicon mission continues. The list goes on, but that's a key notion there. Is from a societal perspective is to be of service to the community still, but from the mental health perspective is that those veterans who still engage in that service, that is one of the key forms of treatment or therapy, is to carry that flag of service with them throughout their transition and throughout life.
I just wanted to real quick just say, I think just shifting the perspective from a deficits-based perspective to a strengths-based can do a lot of good for the veteran population.
Well said. Thank you. Steve?
I have 5 questions that I've received so far, and I think they're very much in line with what you're talking about right now. And I'm just going to start. What are the stereotypes, if any, that vets have to deal with on a college campus? Okay. The second question is, how do attitudes about PTSD among active service members differ from that of the general civilian population? And can the civilian population learn something from the military on this topic? The third, do you have any information about the program to teach vets to become psychologists? Okay, this is two questions, two more questions. In the military, it is expected that emotions are pushed aside. If something traumatic happens, soldiers are just meant to, in quotations, man up. There is a feminine stigma attached to breaking down and revealing your emotions. How did hiding your emotions affect your transition home or your experiences in the field? Was there indeed an expectation to man up and conceal feelings? And then the last, a vet from our campus vet center had an appointment with me but came an hour before the appointed time. When our office assistant explained that I was in session, that his appointment was scheduled for the next hour, he flew into a rage and stormed out. First, what might I have done differently? Second, what would be the best way to handle it now, especially given my own deep antipathy toward people who handle their anger in that fashion? So those are the questions.
Thanks. Wow. If that isn't enough to take us into tomorrow afternoon, I don't know what is. So.
I think we can chip away here. Just the stereotypes on campus. I think I just talked about that. Hey, you don't look like a veteran. You don't perceive to be a veteran. It's not what veterans look like. It's just that, and that's not just among the peers as well. Faculty and teachers who don't know veterans are in the classroom. Say certain things and probably that not realizing who's in their audience. That's from the stereotypical views. Hey, you don't look like that World War II or old guy with a hat or homeless guy on the street. That's what a veteran's supposed to look like. It's that Lieutenant Dan look, right? So that is the only thing that really jumps out at me.
I would add to that too. I think just the idea that this veteran's going to go off on campus and they're a ticking time bomb. That unfortunately still does exist out there. And I think we talked about this yesterday. Just to this stereotype, and it doesn't really happen like that. That's not the way. We just don't find that to be true.
I will say there actually are a couple of somewhat comedic but also fairly serious YouTube videos out there. Check it out, like what civilians say to military, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, the quotes that a lot of military get from civilians and just sheer ignorance is really quite astounding. Some of those videos, I think, highlight that. I don't know if you guys have ever seen any of those, but to us, we find them kind of funny because, I've personally gotten all of that. And you're like, okay. But so that might be worth checking out if you want to look at some stereotypes. If I can actually just touch on the emotions part real quick. There is, I think, a stigma against opening up. Even, and it starts at basic training. You're at basic training, you might have something broken, could be a limb, could be a finger, but the stigma of going to sick call or sick bay is so heavily discriminated against that from day one is ingrained in you. If you feel pain, suck it up. If you are having a tough time, suck it up. You got pneumonia? Cool, we all have pneumonia. Get over it. And so that from the very early stages is ingrained in you, largely because come combat, if you have a broken finger, enemy's still coming. You need to keep pulling the trigger. It's not about being able to, suck it up per se. It's about being able to function with pain and understand that you have pain, but you still need to keep going because the number one focus is mission accomplishment. Translating that to then a transition can be very difficult. I don't know that the military does an exceptional job at making that leap, and I think there's definitely some work to be done there. So In terms of how to address that, I find that group support actually can be very helpful. Many times, individuals, they'll say, well, nobody's going to want to come to a group session. No one's going to want to open up their feelings. I think they're very effective. I've seen them be very effective. There was a session I was in, an individual raised the question, do you guys sometimes just cry for no reason? Kind of said it jokingly, but then some guys were like, yeah, haha, I do. Oh, you too? And so to start to open that dialogue and realize, oh, that is normal, that happens. You're not just, in your room crying and that you can't tell anyone about that. So you start to kind of break down those barriers through that. I don't know if you guys have any experience.
Sorry. Yeah.
I kind of wanted to add a couple things. Sure. First of all, I think it's important to note that most service members transitioning out of the military don't have any mental illness or disabilities. And right now the research is somewhat soft because we're still counting. When you look at the literature, you'll see anywhere from 20 to 30% of service members will either have PTSD and TBI, and of course some type of mood disorder or depression related to various exposures. Some of it will be combat, some of it will be MST. It varies. So that leaves us, with that 20 to 30% that may have difficulties on the campus in terms of transitioning, and that could be considered an at-risk groups, and very similar to the populations that we were speaking of yesterday when we were talking about mental illness on the panel and the services. However, the services for that subpopulation of military are going to be slightly different than what the social services that are needed for just general students with general mental health. I would argue in terms of the peer-to-peer support relationship that's very, very important. They need someone that kind of looks like them, metaphorically, that kind of understands where they've been and the culture and the indoctrination that they've experienced. And so that part is different, as well as some of the VA hoops and legalities that they have to go through in terms of getting their benefits. There is no cookie cutter approach, but one of the things that have become very salient to me since I've been a part of an academic center is the idea of safety and trust, not just on the campus, but in the classroom as well. And maybe us collectively as a group or a society looking at that process and how we engage in our students, not just on a single one-to-one manner, but on a collective manner as well. And once you're able to make that connection with that person, then you're likely to get additional information that may be helpful in that student's success, as well as removing some of the myths and stereotypes and prejudgments that make division and separation as opposed to support.
Yeah, and I just wanted to follow up too on the emotional component too. I think, like Will was speaking to, when you go through the training and when you're in combat, it kind of shutting down emotionally serves a purpose. It's a protective factor to get the job done. Mm-hmm. And so in that situation, it works and it's needed. But when that transition, when you're not in that context and you're back on campus, there can be, this reluctance to go seek help maybe and acknowledge these emotional problems that come up. And I see this when, one of my specialties is treating trauma and PTSD. But what we found through our program Outside the Wire is that veterans can get to that point where they are going to open up that emotional aspect and open up to those emotional experiences through talking to other vets, through having someone on campus that that understands their culture, where they're coming from, allows them time to develop a level of trust and comfort to get to that place where they're willing to come in and talk. So I just wanted to mention that there is a protective factor there for kind of shutting down emotionally, but it does need to get to a point where it can be, we come back around to it and can shift it from that to the other.
And I would say, Todd, when that small window of opportunity presents itself in terms of the veteran opening up, we've got to be ready to step in and provide those services. And what that would look like is some type of organized plan, veteran support center, to include having the counseling centers on board to navigate those services for that student. Because if not, they shut down and just the opposite occurs.
Right, there's a missed opportunity.
Definitely.
For me, in my experience, I think it just begins with education. And that's, I think, to echo what Will said earlier, I'm glad that everyone is here. And so hopefully you can take this back to, where your place of employment, college, community college, and just begin to educate yourself and other people, because that's, to me, where it starts. And then you can, further develop the intention and motivation and openness for change.
I think, I definitely got to comment on the drink water mentality. Take Motrin and drink water, especially from an emotional perspective, because I think there's a way that we could use that to our advantage to treat emotional disconnection and emotional numbness. And if you're able to capture that opportunity and really get that veteran going, then there's a way to say, okay, now that you got it out, what are you going to do? Let's talk about the drink water, and let's turn that into resilience. Let's kind of piggyback off your already, because I want Dr. Finney to definitely touch on the kind of the physiological rewiring that happens, in the brain, and how there's no crossing back over, but how to use that as a strength rather than a weakness. Yes, it's a weakness in terms of being emotionally numb, emotionally shut down, but if we can look at it from a strengths perspective and say, okay, now how are you going to use that to be resilient through your mental health treatment? How are you going to use that to be resilient through navigating the VA system, navigating the academic world, the community college? Let's talk about it from a different lens, and understand that rewiring in the brain is never going to go back to the way it was, pre-military or pre-deployment. And that's one of the things that I enjoyed about, from your perspective, is kind of that understanding the physiological components of that thought process.
Yeah.
And Kim and I might be able to talk to faculty in the room who deal with students. And granted, my environment is unique because they're all military people and they've all deployed typically numerous times. And I teach a course on war and trauma, and I teach a course on military women in contemporary society where we deal with issues like military sexual trauma. And I start every class with a wellness check, and we literally go around, and I get a thumbs up, which means good to go, I'm good to go, or not. And in that environment, that works. And if they're not okay, we stop the action, because of the way the brain works, there's no need to go any further until everybody's okay. And there's specific issues that faculty deal with. Students may have difficulty concentrating, difficulty with memory, a very low frustration for trivia and irrelevant and stupid things, and frustration. Don't ask them to do things that don't have meaning or purpose. And I'll give you a quick anecdote. I was at the board one day with a student diagramming. This was a research design class, so we're designing the method, and I look over at him, He has a head like Todd, and his whole head was wet. He was wet. He was talking and performing, but he had broken out in a sweat. Well, we pressed on until he said, "I'm sorry, I have to step out a minute." And he did. He stepped out, we went on with the class, came back, and he said, "I'm sorry, it's my PTSD and I've changed my meds. Are you okay? Yeah. This is a safe place. Let's get back to the board." Because the one thing vets want to do is get back on the horse. But they need to know that it's safe to do that and that their behavior was normalized. You know, I just said to him, we all have something we're dealing with, especially here. We all have our stuff we're dealing with. And keep them going in a forward motion. Press on. I think there's more questions, Steve?
We have many more questions.
I assume the one about the vet storming out of the treatment center would be important. How to handle that? Veterans becoming psychologists? Okay, that was the. Do you have information about the program to teach vets to become psychologists? Is it directed at anybody in particular?
I would actually be happy to speak with anyone who's interested about that. So please come and speak with me.
Thanks, Steve. Okay.
Oh, do you want to do the one about the vet storming?
Yeah, do you have advice for the person concerned about the vet who stormed out?
It's interesting. I mean, more information. I would want to know more information about the scenario for sure. But based on what you shared, I mean, several things comes to mind. It's not necessarily uncommon for anyone that's been under an enormous amount of stress to be short in terms of having patience. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to mention, well, let me just elaborate on the patience issue. So whether or not a veteran has been deployed or not, and I'd say over the 2 million, about 75% of the service members have been deployed, there's a lot of moving pieces. And quite often the stress level is at its max of 10. And sleeping is an issue, among other things, that most people would experience when they have an overactive sympathetic system. So that said, people tend to be more irritable and less patient when they fall into that category. Another thing I heard as you were reading that question is maybe, but not all vets will have TBI, although it is becoming the signature wound, traumatic brain injury, where I've had patients where, they would forget their appointment or have a different time than their appointment. And it's because of the memory problem. And so with that, in both scenarios, again, you can have a negative outcome if you're not able to intervene in a way where you work on the relationship with that person, and with that, getting as much information as you can to help them navigate, him or her navigate their way in a positive manner.
I think from a campus perspective, I'm just going to throw this out there and kind of go against the grain a little bit. From a campus perspective, I think that's absolutely why we need, a set position, Director of Veterans Affairs or Director of Student Veteran Services here on campus, why we need a Veterans Resource Center, why we need an active Vets Club. Because, on the flip side of that coin, we need to hold it, that behavior is not acceptable, even in our community. It's just not. And we need to hold each other accountable. And we need to, have that peer-to-peer mentorship and that interaction. So I can go to that veteran and say, hey, that's not acceptable. That's not okay behavior. That's not how we treat people. That's not the picture that we want to paint. That's not the image that we want to portray. And there's an accountability there. We used to do it in the military all the time. That's the job of a non-commissioned officer is to hold people accountable. And we need to translate that back into the campus community. And I think that's one of the essential reasons why we need mentorship programs, peer-to-peer programs, a veteran resource center, so that veteran could go straight to the veteran resource center. Or that person, the psychologist, can call the director of student veteran services and say, hey, this just happened in my office. And then that director can call the vet club president and say, hey, this veteran just is having a really tough time. Can you take care of that? And then me as a president would go to that veteran and essentially counsel that veteran and say, hey, what is going on? What's really happening? How can I help you? We've got a ton of battle buddies here on campus. But first and foremost, that behavior it's not okay. And we need to be able to be in a position and set up to hold ourselves accountable to make sure that doesn't continue, because that's going to just play into, oh, there's that pissed off veteran again. And that's the image that we're all trying to change.
You touch on a good point, actually, that I want to highlight, and that's having a good network. Mm-hmm. Having a good liaison network on any campus, I think, is extremely crucial. Whatever office on campus there is, whether it be academics, counseling center, finance center, you name it, it's really important to have a point of contact in every single office so they know what's going on. If something comes up related to finances or related to counseling, this veteran liaison network, if you will, they can be in contact with each other, and there's no confusion of, well, who do I talk to in that office about this? Over time they kind of pick up some pieces of information that will help them address these situations and can really afford them that referral system throughout the campus community. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah.
And just to kind of answer that person who ever posed the question about the veterans storming off, I see that quite frequently for different reasons, like Kim mentioned. Also, that they can talk to a person who was just rude to them. But I think just following up with that student veteran, and like we've been talking about, developing a relationship. If you have a relationship, it's going to go a long way. And I just would follow up and do a sidebar, just a one-on-one.
Absolutely.
Just talk to them. Talk to them. Talk about what happened. Talk about where we're going to go from there. That's all. That can go a long way and kind of take care of it pretty fast.
I think we have more questions. Steve.
We've got several more questions. And we started a few minutes late, so we'll go on this panel until 20 till the hour, and then we'll have our full half-hour break. And the next panel will have its full time. Okay. I'll just read them all. Has there been any formalized work on utilizing family members to assist vets with transition from the military to the classroom? First question. Second, to what extent is PTSD more of a normal reaction to comment than not having negative reactions to the stress of combat? And maybe the latter merits our study. Third, first of all, thank you for your service. Hypothetically, what should the procedure be if therapy with a veteran uncovers something illegal that occurred to the veteran during their service? I am thinking most specifically of military sexual assault, as it has been in the news recently. Fourth, do you think that there is a, quote, generational gap between veterans and their millennial student peers? Is there a gap, for example, in services accessibility that schools offer? These are examples. Technology shifts to more online and less in-person contact. Depersonalized environments such as online and Facebook tweets. Parental involvement emphasis, e.g., we have orientations for parents, but what about for families? And requirements such as standardized tests for entry, writing, and help aimed at the right level and relevance. Fifth question, how do your agencies handle when mental illness occurs for a student veteran? Are they treated at campus clinics, or are they referred to VA service facilities? And the last question, Adam, could you talk about your relationship with Rakishan?
Thanks, Steve. I think everybody wants to know that one. Go ahead. See? Thank you. She moved from under the table to the forward. We have therapy dogs on our campus, and I was saying to Adam that sometimes they'll walk by my office, and if they don't stop, I think to myself, I'm okay today. But sometimes they stop and come in and put their head on my lap, and so I have to do a gut check myself. What was I sending out that Laura Lee thought she needed to come in and see me about?
Yeah, we get a lot of attention. We're the focus of a lot of attention. Okay, Rakishan. There's a whole story to that. I'll try to be as concise but as effective as possible. Okay, when I came home in 2004, like I said, I went onto a college campus. Roughly about 3 months literally from the front lines to a college campus, and the stereotypical transition. I mean, I could say it in better terms. Stereotypical transition. Didn't have a good experience there. Was still in combat mode, and I got triggered, and I handled it the way I would have handled it while I was deployed. Fortunately, I didn't get in any legal trouble because of that. However, I did get asked to leave. I was on Montgomery GI Bill benefits at the time, and when you withdraw from going to school while you're receiving benefits, your income stops. And so, not in school, not receiving benefits, completely alienated and disconnected from my family because of me, obviously, and then unable to find employment. I mean, I couldn't even work for free in some places. So I was rendered homeless for quite some time. So after being homeless and kind of thinking to myself, well, I'm still young. I still have a lot of life to live. So let me try to get myself out of this situation. I was afforded an opportunity, and that's kind of how I got started back up in school again in 2005, almost a year later. But I was still dealing with this thirst for combat. I mean, I was an infantry soldier in the Army, so I was still in that mentality. I was able to go back to school and understand that my behavior had to change, but still my mental thinking hadn't changed. My rewiring hadn't changed, so I was still in that mode. I was just controlling it a little bit better. And then I started seeking services. I went to the VA. I started going to treatment, psychotherapy, occupational therapy, speech pathology, physical therapy, neuropsychology, and the TBI clinic for 2 years. And I was doing better. I was getting all these coping skills, and I was really into it. I was like, I got to heal. And my motivation is I didn't want veterans to go through some of the things that I had gone through. Kind of this wanting to go out and fight. I didn't want to do drugs. Drinking was okay, but I was into violence. And so going through all this treatment, I was doing okay. And then I didn't really stop treatment, but I was like, okay, instead of once a week, come once every 2 weeks. Instead of once every 2 weeks, you come once a month. And then I got triggered again. And I felt myself going back to where I was. And this is one of the things that I want to make sure that we touch on in this panel before our time is up, and that's suicide. And not just being suicidal in terms of I want to kill myself, but an apathetic approach to life, meaning I didn't really care if I lived or died or not. I was going to live my life to the fullest, and if death found me, then so be it. I was okay with that, and that's how I got into my motorcycle accident and spent a few days in ICU because of that. So that's where I was. And when I got triggered again, I knew I was going back to that place. And I was so scared that if I went back to that place, that I wasn't going to come out alive this time. So I knew I had to communicate this. I was like, okay, I gotta let somebody know this is where I'm going. And so they tried to put me on prescription medication, but that doesn't work for me. It rendered me inebriated. I couldn't function. I still had to go to school. I still had a son to raise, and so I needed to find a way to function. So someone mentioned to me, how about you get a service dog? And I have 2 cats, and I was like, a service what? A what? And this was at the time when it was kind of, taboo, I guess, service dog. Only blind people had service dogs, or severely disabled people had service dogs. So I thought about it, and at that point, I knew I had to do something to save my life. And so I assessed for the service dog, and when I went through the assessment, it was 2 hours, and they asked, okay, what are you looking for? What are your symptoms? And we went through the entire assessment, told them what I was going through, and I said, I want the biggest, baddest, meanest German Shepherd you can find. You know why? Because my biggest fear is being in a position of not being able to defend myself. I'm a soldier, I'm a warrior. If somebody comes into a movie theater and decides to start shooting, I want to be able to shoot back, not only to protect myself, but to protect everybody around me. So I need this big dog so we can go out there and kick some ass, right? So fortunately, the lady who assessed me, she's the founder, her name is Clarissa Black with Pets for Vets. She said, okay, well, I totally get that. So what we do is we're a rescue organization. We don't have a pool of dogs that you can choose from. So we're going to try to get as close to what it is that you're looking for to help you that we could find. I was like, okay, cool. Pit bull, Rottweiler, anything will do, right? So I was like, okay, great. 2 months later, she said, hey, we found your dog. He looks like a white German Shepherd, so I think you'll be okay. I was like, all right, cool. Well, that white German Shepherd, doesn't look too mean, but all right, I guess so. As long as he's big and he's aggressive like me. So when she delivered him, I kind of looked at him. I was like, well, what is this? I didn't ask for cute. I asked for mean. But I gave it a shot. I was like, okay. I was really anxious about it. I've never had a dog before in my life. I'm a cat guy. I've had cats all my life. We got through the adjustment period. I adjusted, he adjusted, and we did some training. They trained him. We trained together, and we started to really bond and connect. And then a few months later, 6 to 9 months later, I started to feel different. I wasn't walking around with my chest out looking for the next person who I was going to engage. I wasn't looking at rooftops. I wasn't out looking for a fight. That wasn't my desire anymore. The more time I spent with Rakusan, the more I started to open up and break down and started to see the good in people again. Started to see how valuable this thing called love really is and what it is and kind of what it feels like. I have a family. I've got a son, but it was completely different. And so, like I said, during all that treatment, not to knock the mental health profession or if it wasn't for the VA, I wouldn't even consider Rakusan in the first place. But like I said, it was the difference between doing better and getting better. It was what put me over the top in terms of the healing process. It allowed me to connect to myself, connect to my family, connect to other people, build relationships, sleep 8 hours a night without nightmares, completely just quelled the hypervigilance, the anxiety, the scene, the bad in people, the desire to go out and pick fights, or to get to engage, confrontational, argumentative, just completely started to minimize that. I'm not saying he's the be-all end-all to treatment and to therapy and to PTSD and TBI, but he works for me. And people ask me all the time, how does he work? I have no clue how he does it. I really don't. Like, I just know that he works. And so we share senses. I really believe that it's divine intervention. I truly believe that God placed him at the right dog at the right time, and because I was ready for it. I was ready for the healing process. So now it's I don't want to say like, once you pull the trigger, you're never gonna erase that. You're not gonna, once you cross that, I call it crossing the rainbow bridge. You pay the guy a quarter and you cross over. Once you do that, you're never going back. And I don't expect to ever go back. But I can see the other side. I can move forward. I can move beyond that on-killing, rewiring. And that's what Roxanne, our relationship has done for me, is helped me to rewire some of the thought processes in my head and really kind of let go of that demon of being in that environment. That's what Roxanne does for me, and that's why I have them. And people say, will there come a point when you don't need Roxanne? Maybe not. But right now he's working, and he's working pretty good for me. So that's our relationship.
Very nice. Just to kind of highlight something Adam said, in the arena of suicide, I found quite often in working with various generations of vets, from Vietnam vets to 2K vets, if you will, and the idea of, asking the question, do you have thoughts of hurting yourself, or are you suicidal? Quite often you'll get the answer, no, not at all. But when followed by a second question of, do you value your life? You're going to get a totally different response, and what that looks like. I'm ready to die, and if it happens, it happens. I've had individuals tell me, people are very safe, driving, and thoughts of just gently moving their car in a direction, to precipitate their demise.
I'm not going to hurt myself on purpose, but I'm gonna go out there and start doing wheelies on a motorcycle down a freeway. If I survive, cool. If not, cool too. Like whatever. So, and I think that's one of the things that I guess falls through the cracks, is that thinking, and also survivor's guilt falls through the cracks. We always want to say PTSD or suicide, but we don't want to intertwine survivor's guilt into that as well, and the apathetic view to life. So, and I think that's what Roxanne does for me.
The question about services, I think. And Adam will speak to this too. I mean, there's a large population that goes to the VA for mental health services, and some of those individuals get good service. They would say they get good service there, and others would say they don't. Our program offers an alternative to that, where we work with people on campus in the Veteran Resource Center. There are some veterans who don't want to go to the VA because of the bureaucracy, or they're concerned that something's going to be on their records. They want to keep it off their record in terms of if they're going to be applying for a job down the line. They're for the most part getting their services at the VA, maybe a nonprofit like ours, or maybe their own medical provider. But for the most part, that's how my experience has been here in Los Angeles with that.
There were a couple of questions on families and family support. Would your center have any suggestions for that, Kim?
SIR has several studies that are going on. Their primary focus is research, service member as well as families. But in terms of just actual support programs, In the LA area, I'm not completely familiar with. I know there are a few.
There are, and the VA has realized that, hey, it's not just the veteran, we have to work with the family,
The
because
service
when the
members.
veteran comes back, there's a family there oftentimes, and they're impacted oftentimes as much or more than the veteran themselves. So I think they're moving more in a direction of opening up some services. There are vet centers, local vet centers in the communities that are available to offer family services. Our program does as well. I think in the future there will be more programs like ours offering this family services. There are also research. There's a program through UCLA, the Focus program, that offers, I think it's a psychoeducation based
It is.
program for families
But
and kids.
yeah, there is a need there.
There is.
Absolutely.
Most definitely, and so families, and then programs for children specifically, I think would also be useful.
And not just veteran families or active duty families, but Gold Star families as well. I mean, Gold Star families to me need the same amount of services that everybody else does. And if you don't know clarity, Gold Star means that your family member was killed, while in service. Not necessarily killed in combat, killed in a training mission, and killed by suicide or killed while in service. So those family members need service. Those children need services. A lot of these kids, gave their parents to this country. A lot of parents gave their children to this country. A lot of spouses gave their spouse to this country. And once they've given their loved one to this country, we're just kind of like, well, okay, cool, thanks, we appreciate it. Here's your folded flag. What happens next? Well, not much. Take your $250,000 and your folded flag and drink water and deal with it. So we need to make sure that we also take care of the grief and loss component within the first few months to the next year, to the few years down the road of those families, especially, I don't want to say especially, but, the children that are going to grow up orphaned, and the single moms or single parents who now have to raise those kids. And it just got swept away. If you go from a military support system to nothing, here's your $250. Have a nice day. Folded flag. So we got to make sure that from a service provider's perspective, we address those family members as well.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but before we go, would the veterans in the audience raise their hands?
Stand up.
Stand up. Let us thank you for your service to our country. And we'll be around all afternoon if anyone wants to engage us further. But thank you so much for coming. Thank you, panel,
Thank you.
for your
Thank you.
participation.
We'll now we'll have a half an hour break, so we'll reconvene with session 5 at 10 minutes after